The vast concert hall was a monument to cold, polished metal and silent expectation. It was not built for human sensibilities, but for the mathematical precision of the harmonious collective. The air hummed with a low, synthetic frequency, a note meant to calm the varied species of the galactic audience. They sat in orderly rows, their forms a study in alien geometry carapaces, frills, and light-refracting skins, all united under the collective's doctrine of auditory perfection. Music here was not art. It was a science of predictable harmonic structures, a utility for optimal neural stimulation. Complexity was inefficient. Deviation was error. The human contingent, a mere 5 diplomats in simple gray suits, sat in an isolated block. They were tolerated, their presence a political formality. Their species was considered audibly primitive. Their historical compositions, analyzed by collective music logicians, were deemed erratic, emotionally overwrought, and structurally unsound. Tonight's performance was a final, polite dismissal of their cultural relevance. The stage was empty save for a single instrument, brought from Earth at great cost. A grand piano. To the collective, it was a fascinatingly primitive acoustic device, all hammers and wires in a wooden box. Its shape was pleasingly archaic. A technician had already calibrated the hall's resonance dampers to compensate for its inefficient sound dispersion. The performer walked onto the stage. She was young, by human standards, her posture straight, but not stiff. She wore a dark, plain dress. She did not look at the audience of thousands, her gaze instead falling upon the piano. To the aliens, her expression was unreadable. To the humans, it was a look of profound, quiet communion. She sat. The hall's lighting focused into a cool being, a collective arbiter, a being of slender, silver limbs. Announced the programmed selection, a pre-approved etude from the human canon, a piece their analysis deemed most technically competent and least emotionally disruptive. The title was a numeric code. The audience prepared for a brief, interesting demonstration of antique sonic production. Her hands rested on the keys. For a moment, there was only the hum of the hall. Then she began. The notes of the etude were precise, clean, and utterly lifeless. She played it exactly as transcribed in the collective's databanks. It was a ghost of music, a skeleton. A faint ripple of polite approval moved through the audience. This was acceptable. This was within parameters. The human diplomats felt a sinking weight. This was the capitulation they feared. The final, correct note of the etude faded into the hum. The performer's hands remained on the keys. The arbiter made a motion to stand, to thank her, and conclude the proceedings. But she did not rise. Instead, she took a breath, so deep it was visible from the front row. She closed her eyes. When they opened, they held a different focus, a light that had not been there before. Her posture shifted, a subtle relaxation, as if she were alone in a room with an old friend. She began again. This time, it was not the etude. It was a single, low, resonant chord that seemed to vibrate not just the air, but the very bones of the listeners. It was not loud, but it was present in a way the previous notes were not. Then came a melody, simple at first, a wandering thread of sound that coiled through the silence. It was not complex by collective standards, but it was fluid. It breathed. The arbiter froze. This was not on the program. The logic screens before each seat, meant to display real-time harmonic analysis, flickered with irregular patterns. The dampers tasked with smoothing the sound struggled. They detected vibrato, a slight imperfection in the timing between notes, a dynamic range that shifted like a living thing. The melody grew. It was a story without words. It spoke of a blue-green world, of open skies and deep forests, of solitary walks and crowded cities. It held the joy of a sunrise and the gentle ache of memory. The performer's hands moved with a grace that was neither mechanical nor frantic, but purposeful. She leaned into the phrases, her body a conduit for the sound. The piano was no longer a device. It was a voice taught in the audience, a Vrillian, whose culture communicated via chromatophore shifts, found its skin cycling through hues of confusion and fascination. The strict, pleasing patterns it expected were absent, replaced by an unpredictable flow that somehow resonated with its own emotional pigmentations. A cantorin, a being of crystal and resonant frequencies, felt a strange, uncalculated harmonic forming in its core, a sympathetic vibration that was not commanded, but invited. The music swelled. It was no longer just a scene. It was a storm. Bass notes rumbled like tectonic plates. Treble passages flashed like lightning. The rhythm became complex, polyphonic, a tapestry of intersecting pulses that should have been chaos, but instead formed a thrilling, coherent whole. It was the sound of struggle, of creation, of a species reaching always beyond its grasp. It was defiant, hopeful, and unbearably beautiful. One of the human diplomats, an older man who had fought for decades for cultural recognition, felt tears trace lines down his cheeks. He was not ashamed. He was hearing the soul of his people, refined into sound, and offered without apology to the cold stars. The collective's logic screens began to fail. The data was too chaotic, the algorithms unable to categorize the emotional content, the deliberate imperfections, the rubato that stretched time like taffy. The harmonic analysis simply displayed one word over and over: anomaly. On stage, the performer was elsewhere. Sweat gleamed on her brow. The physical cost of the piece was immense, but her focus was absolute. This was the transition, the journey from the easy notes of the etude, the simple, correct facts, to the masterpiece. This was the human element, the feeling, the intangible thing no scanner could quantify, the ghost in the machine of flesh and wire and wood. The climax approached. It was a cascade of notes, a waterfall of sound that seemed to defy the possibility of only two hands. It was triumphant, but the triumph was tempered with loss, with wisdom, with the quiet knowledge of dawn after a long night. It was not a victory of conquest, but of endurance. And then it began to recede. The storm passed. The complex themes returned, simplified now, transformed by the journey. A single, pure melodic line emerged, tender and weary and full of peace. It was a lullaby for the cosmos. The final notes were struck softly, a resolution that felt less like an ending and more like a door left open. The sound faded into a silence deeper than the hall had ever known. The ever-present synthetic hum was gone, switched off or simply overwhelmed. The air itself felt different, charged, alive. The performer's hands lowered to her lap. She was still, head bowed. For 10 full seconds, nothing moved. Then, a cantorin in the third row did something unprecedented. It resonated. A pure, clear tone from its crystalline form. Not a word, but an echo of the final chord, a gesture of participation. It was a breach of protocol. It was an answer dot, as if that were the signal. The Vrillian erupted in a silent explosion of brilliant, shifting color, a visual symphony of awe. Another being, a gas form contained in a suit, pulsed with soft, internal light. All across the hall, in 100 different physiologies, the reaction manifested not as applause, a crude human concept, but in their own languages of light, sound, and motion. The silence was replaced by a soft, wondrous cacophony of alien response. The silver-limbed arbiter slowly rose. Its logic screen was dark. It looked at the small human on the stage, then at the transformed audience. Its voice, when it finally spoke through the hall system, carried none of its prior certainty. The performance, it said, the words translated but trembling, exceeds our analytical parameters. We have no metric for what has been transmitted. We register only a profound disturbance in optimal reception. A positive disturbance. It was the closest the collective had ever come to admitting wonder. The performer finally stood. She faced the audience, gave a small, respectful nod, not to the arbiters of taste, but to the listeners. The human diplomats stood as one, their faces wet, their hearts swollen. They were no longer representatives of an audibly primitive species. They were the bearers of a mystery dot as she walked off the stage. The alien sounds of appreciation continued to swirl in the hall. The piano sat under the light, its polished wood gleaming. It was just wood and wire again. But for a time, it had been a key. It had unlocked not a more complex equation, but a door in the minds of those who heard. It had shown them that a masterpiece was not built from perfect, easy notes alone, but from the brave, beautiful, and utterly illogical space between them.